My name is Cameron Russell. I'm a first-year MBA student here at MIT Sloan, and it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Eric Eager, VP of Research and Development at SumerSports. He's going to be talking about the SumerSports Draft Dashboard, sponsored by SumerSports.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. We're a little early, which if any of my colleagues are in the room, they'll know how much of an anomaly that is. Well, thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure and a privilege, obviously, to be able to talk at Sloan and talk to you today about SumerSports. If anybody was at the talk this morning the panel between Paul Tudor-Jones and Jonathan Kraft, Paul talked in great length about what we're trying to do, which is to basically synthesize all this great data that football is giving us into recommendations that are that are first in class. Moving ahead here. Oh, previous back. Okay. And as my friends will always say, I always bring it back to Kansas City and the Chiefs here. But 3 weeks ago, we just saw Kansas City win their third Super Bowl in 5 years, 25-22. It was a game, again, that went to overtime, just the second Super Bowl in the history of the league to have to play an extra frame. It was the first Super Bowl in league history where a quarterback was making the top cap hit among his peers in the NFL, and it was just the second Super Bowl where a quarterback was making more than 15% of his team's salary cap, and it was only the second because the year before the Chiefs did it for the first time. The margins are incredibly thin in the NFL, and even when you get to the top of the mountain, they become even thinner. Growing up, I grew up at a time when the NFC basically won, I think it was something like 14 or 15 consecutive Super Bowls from the mid-'80s all the way until about 2008 or so. All but like 3 or 4 Super Bowls had a point spread of a touchdown or more in the betting markets. And now we're in an age of incredible tightness in the NFL. If you look at the last, basically since 2009, every single point spread in the Super Bowl has been 5 points or less, so not even a touchdown. And in many cases, in case of all 4 of the Kansas City Super Bowls, with the best player, the best coach, some of the best roster constructions in the world, they've only been favored in 2 Super Bowls, and they've been underdogs in the last 2. And the one that they were favored by the most, they were beaten by the most. And so this is a game where the margins are incredibly tight, even for the best teams, and yet at the same time, the search space is incredibly vast. I know in the talk this morning by Paul, he talked about chess, right? And chess is one of those games where the combinatorics get incredibly explosive as you iterate through the entire space. So after, for example, 3 moves, there's 9 million possibilities. After 4 moves, something like billions of possibilities. After you get to sort of the steady state of the whole game, it's 10 to the 80th, which is more than the number of atoms in the universe, as he so eloquently said. It very much mimics what we're dealing with when we try to do things in the National Football League. For example, and one of them, this first one is kind of, just trying to blow this out of proportion. But there's, we at SumerSports, for example, have scouted over 700 players for this draft. The average team, now it's a little bit more than 7 picks because of comp picks, but there are 7 rounds in the NFL draft. There's 9 quadrillion possible draft classes to take out of that, which is immense. And that, of course, I think we all know that that's big, and we all know that that number is an upper bound, of course, because there's first round, second round. We know Caleb Williams in all likelihood is going to go first, and we're going to see that in a second. But it's still quite big. And to even give you an even sort of more tractable problem here, if you're an NFL general manager and you're trying to fill out the last 12 positions on your roster, so let's say you have 9 camp bodies, and you have, let's say the first 41 of your roster positions more or less known, then you have the last 12 real opens. This has been basically the general manager of the present's job, or his or her staff, for, the entire time the NFL has been a thing. And it's still 92 billion possible combinations just to fill out the back end of your roster. And, when you think about who wins the Super Bowl, it ends up being Mecole Hardman, who was a player who was traded. He's literally the 53rd player on the Kansas City Chiefs, scoring the game-winning touchdown, and yet he's part of these decisions that these teams have to undergo to try to win championships. And so, it's been incredibly hard for NFL general managers to do this, not only in a successful way, because successful is, I think, in the eye of the beholder. We all know one of the biggest problems in football is that of windows, right? You have some teams who are trying, like the 2021 Rams, who are trying to win one Super Bowl in one particular year, and you have teams like the last New England Patriots dynasty who was trying to win multiple Super Bowls over a decade or two. And so even that, success is of the eye of the beholder, but process is not, right? Having a process in place, being able to synthesize things, this is where we can take lessons from finance and lessons from our founder, Paul Tudor Jones, in his macro trading career. We can take some lessons from what they're doing there. So this is where SumerSports has come into the, since basically the beginning of 2022, this is where SumerSports has come into play. And our cornerstone sort of product goal is to build what we're calling Marvel. Marvel stands for maximizing roster value. And ultimately, Marvel is a way to develop a process for evaluating any proposed roster with a single number called roster value. And that requires being able to evaluate players in a way that's robust, that's a way that takes basically what the client club wants, that takes in things like injuries, takes in psychometrics, things like that, and builds out not only a value for a player, but also how that player fits within what the team wants. And then we have to go through the process of optimization, so identifying all rosters that could be built, given basically any set of player availability at any given time, which can always be a problem given, as we've seen, like even a guy that caught a touchdown in the Super Bowl was cut 3 days ago at the scouting combine. So that's a very time-sensitive problem. And then among all these rosters, find the one that has the highest roster value, that has the highest predicted power in terms of a team winning. Now, this problem it's vast and it's diverse, right? Because this has a different process, let's say in August, when a team's trying to cut down, as I said, with the billions of possibilities there, but it also has something to do in free agency, where teams are going to try and bid for players in a marketplace. It has a different utility in the draft, where teams are going to go and try to draft college players. And so that latter part is where we've focused our attention here at Sumer with what we're going to introduce today, which is called the draft dashboard. So our draft dashboard is an all-in-one tool that allows decision makers to leverage their club's data and evaluation along with our proprietary algorithms to give them the best recommendations for maximizing the roster value in the draft. And the one thing I want to focus on today, so firstly, we're not going to give you the club's data today. That's not a thing. But we do, our biggest thing is we know that the clubs grade their own players. They know what they want in players. What they're not necessarily all that great or equipped to do is to take those things and synthesize them up into roster value. So what we want to do is take the club's micro evaluations and give them macro suggestions or macro recommendations. And the biggest one right now is we want to kind of turn on its head this long-standing problem of whether or not you should make a trade or actually draft somebody in the draft. And this is through the three fundamental values of pick value, team value, and league value. And I'll talk to you guys about that in a second. So again, this is what our draft dashboard looks like. Now again, none of this is real data other than what Sumer collects in his scouting data, which is the SS grade, which you'll see in a second here. But this is our draft dashboard. Up and to the left, you can see how valuable we estimate the New England Patriots, again, our version of the New England Patriots roster in terms of guaranteed money averaged over the next 3 years. Next to it, you have performance caps, which is, again, our estimate of where they have needs. And this is, again, based upon where our measurements of their players' ability versus their roster value. And then to the bottom, you have the comparison space where we can look at different players and different elements of the player prediction. So, for example, we have Malik Neighbors, who's in all likelihood going to be available at the third pick. We have the same thing's true about Dallas Turner, an edge player. Both of those men are worth around $9 million in what's called roster value added, or RVA. Now, Caleb Williams is going to be worth a lot more in RVA, about $19 million in this case. That's what he's going to add to the roster after you account for depth charts and injuries and things like that. But we estimate, and now again, I think that this is a little bit because we're so far out from the draft, but also just because we're kind of trying to play it safe a little bit here. We only estimate that he's going to be available in 14% of the time in the third pick. I actually think it's far closer to 1% than that, but again, you're looking from the view of the third pick, you're looking at what's going to become available to you and how they're going to update your roster there. Performance value is our measure of how valuable a player is if he were to go to a roster with no competition, no injuries, nothing. So it's basically the ceiling on what they would be able to add on average to a team. And then below, which is really cool, is, again, your next pick, which for now, the Patriots have the 35th pick, and various players that could be available to them that could have what's called PRV, which is potential roster value, if they were to select those players at those picks. And again, an estimate for how available those are. Now, for anybody who's in the room who's wondering sort of whether or not there's opportunities here and where, a lot of this is derived via what's called simulation, which we basically have a model that takes in, all of the sort of pertinent information about the draft, about players, and then we go ahead and we have to re-simulate every single scenario to determine if we take this player, what does the landscape look like for the subsequent picks. And that's how we come up with the value, for example, for Michael Penix of anywhere between 82 and 83%, depending upon the simulation we have. It's about 30,000 simulations per pick, per sequence. And then the one thing I want to look at after this is our pick panel to the right, or to the left, I'm sorry. And this is where, again, we've taken heed from teams, especially, the first research paper I ever read in sports analytics, written by Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize, and Cade Massey, who's a phenomenal analyst at Wharton. And they, of course, wrote the Loser's Curse, where they talked about how teams trade up too much, and the difference between the nth player and the n plus first player is not that big, and so almost all the time you should trade back. And that is, generally speaking, true, but there are a lot of cases where this isn't necessarily the case. And so with the three fundamental values, you can actually uncover situations where there is a value. And for us, the left-hand value is what's called pick value. This is the historical value of the draft pick when a quarterback hasn't been selected at that pick. Quarterbacks have such an outsized value relative to other positions that we wanted to take them out so that we had a more flat curve that most people in the analytics community use. The middle value is team value, which is what the projected top pick is worth to that team. In this case, it's going to be Caleb Williams. He's worth $26.8 million in performance value to that team. Again, we want to see a delta between those two values to signal whether or not to trade up for the player, to see whether or not that's worth it. It clearly is there, but we have one more piece of information that we need in order to understand whether or not this is worth it, and that's what's called league value, and that's to the right. League value is a linear combination of basically the values of all of the on-field positions that have been picked at that pick, multiplied by essentially what the likelihood that a player is picked at that position in that draft slot. So in this case, you have Caleb Williams, you have Marvin Harrison, you have Drake May. It's very likely going to be a quarterback picked at 1. So that's why that number 19.4 is closer to the 20.2 and the 20.8 than it is the 12.8. That is essentially our estimate for what we think the league believes is the most, the league believes that pick is worth, right? So to execute, so traditionally in sports analytics, it's always been thought of that trading up is not necessarily worth it. And so you should almost always trade back. And if you are trading up, you are taking a negative EV gamble. That is sort of like one of the 10 commandments of football analytics. But this kind of sort of gives space for the fact that some teams actually have holes that can only be filled with certain parts of the draft. And when it comes to quarterbacks, we've seen many of the great quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes, who we talked about his Kansas City Chiefs at the very beginning, was acquired via a trade up that many people thought was too expensive. In this case, our model would say, well, if you actually grade Caleb Williams as a $27 million player, and the pick is worth $14 million historically when you're not taking a quarterback, and it's worth $20 million to the, or 19.4 to the rest of the league at large, then this is something where you value that much more than the other people do, and it is more valuable than it is more valuable to you than it has been historically. So you should, in fact, go up and trade up and take him. A few more pieces of information on Williams should you want to make the selection. And again, this is mostly dummy data, although because the availability stuff is publicly available, we can use that here. What I really like here is the availability, which sort of looks, and he's 100% available at the first pick because nobody's been taken yet. And then there's like that Laramie Tunsil sort of like, if you're not going to be picked here, it's probably for some bong rip you did or didn't do in college. And so there's actually like this thresholding, right, where you actually slide for quite a bit. And that topology is actually true about quite a few players. And so even though, in my opinion, and of course we'll see the data shake out later on in this draft cycle, it's probably a bit high. He's probably very likely to go first. Right now, 2 years ago, Ike Ekwonu was the favorite to be the first pick. So a lot can happen. We model availability based upon data in a way that it coincides with the history of draft picks, which is that many picks are very unpredictable and players slide quite a bit. To the left-hand side, you also have, again, their New England grade, which again is synthetic here. Their Sumer Scout grade, which is the grade that our scouting staff gives Caleb Williams. And then what that is worth in terms of performance value, which you've seen that 26.8 number repeatedly. And then we have projected games missed, which is our estimate for how many games he will miss in his rookie year. And all of these numbers, which I think is a cornerstone feature of our product, are overridable by the user. So the user can come in and say, oh, I know he's going to be suspended because he got dinged for something, or his data is really bad from an injury perspective, but I'm going to override it because I talked to his personal doctor and he or she assured me that he's fine. I wouldn't advise that, but that can happen. And then we have all the stuff that's actually going to be filled in. Well, it won't be filled in for Williams, but will be filled in for other players as they work out this weekend in Indianapolis. And then again, we have basic other stuff like his measurables and various statistics that you can look at as well. And all of this, again, is to make more informed, more robust, more rigorous decisions. And as Paul Tudor-Jones and Jonathan Kraft talked about in the panel this morning, the average life cycle of a general manager in the NFL is 3.5 years. And I think it's not because necessarily of bad decisions. All kinds of decisions are made in the NFL, both good and bad. And many decisions in the NFL are neither good or bad. The results can be good or bad, of course. But what we want to do is give the modern general manager in the NFL the opportunity to make data-driven decisions where they can go back and when their owner says, why did you do this? They can go through the fundamental reasons why. And I think that gives them more of a fighting chance to have staying power, and of course for everybody in this room to continue the path forward towards making football more robust, making football more rigorous, and giving all of you more jobs in the future. So with that, thank you.
We now have 5 minutes allocated to Q&A if anyone has any questions.
Yeah.
Do you guys factor in those players that maybe don't show up for combine workouts, and how does that impact it?
So we have athleticism measures that come from tracking data as well. That doesn't show up here because we have various licensing issues that we have to basically show that only to the teams and our clients. But yeah, so for many players, in fact, the combine data is not the cornerstone data upon which we measure athleticism. It's the on-field athleticism. You have a question?
Do you guys take into account PFF grades or some other grading system of on-field performance?
We do license third-party data in various aspects of our product. None of that was shown here today, but yeah, we do license. We don't collect, other than Sumer Scout, which is our collection of 400 years of NFL scouting experience for former general managers. We do not collect our own like play-by-play charting data or anything like that. So we do secure that through other parties.
Yeah, how do you value like future picks? So for example, if you have like a 2025 first round pick that the team trades away, how do you sort of, because you don't know where that first round pick is going to be, like 32nd or first, how do you sort of place value on that? So
because we have the roster values for every player and we have the rosters, we are able to simulate future seasons and sort of have a distribution for where people are. So, there are teams that surprise you like Houston, who is picking second last year, now picks 27th, so that's going to change. There's certainly uncertainty there. There's also a discount rate, and so in future versions of the product, we're going to allow the team to give their discount rates. Generally speaking, in practice, much over 100% in the Massey and Thaler paper. In what should be practice, it's probably 25 to 50%, depending upon whether you're going to get fired next year or not. But yeah, there's two factors. There's the uncertainty with respect to team strength, which you can do using simulation and things of that like. There's also how much you want to discount the value of a pick, because a pick later is not worth as much to this team as the pick this year. Yeah.
John Paul Tudor called it the GM's best friend.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you go to a team and convince a GM and president that this is their best friend, this works, this is reliable?
So the big thing is, we want to make it something that enhances what they're already doing. So we don't necessarily want to come in and a lot of companies do this and they're awesome, but like go in and say, hey, this player is an X. Whereas we want the teams to tell us how good they think their quarterback is, and then we want to be able to sort of translate that into dollars and then mash them together and build on the combinatorics that they can't. And build that up. So many of the general managers in the NFL come from evaluating backgrounds. They're scouts. They vote. They want to put eyes on players. They're not necessarily going to want to do the scenario planning that this is going to do for them. We feel that is where we're enhancing the great work that they're doing, as opposed to sort of coming in and replacing what they want to do.
Excuse me.
Going back to the question about how do you value future years picks, how do you value like strength of draft class maybe this year versus next year? Does that go into the model at all?
It does. I mean, we don't like sort of renormalize every single year. Like if a draft class came out with 15 blue chip players versus another with 30, like it would be reflected in how much they're worth, which is why, again, sort of if you go back to this, the old school draft charts will tell you the first pick in the draft is worth this much, whether that first pick is Eric Fisher or that first pick is Andrew Luck, back-to-back years. But Eric Fisher's not worth as much as Andrew Luck. And so to trade up for the first pick in 2013 is going to be different than trading up for the first pick in 2012. So we have, and that again that's part of like where the first stanza of football analytics was great, but it was blunt. And now, once you have a great way of evaluating players, you can sort of be a little bit more refined and sort of talking about how much everything is worth. And that just comes out in the wash. Like our guys grade those players and our algorithms grade those players based upon, just where they would stand in a big sample, not just that year. We don't make it so that there's a certain amount of value in every draft. We let that shake out.
So in terms of like value, is like if you're trading up, are you able to create like a break-even point of a player? So like for example, like if you can get Caleb Williams for trading up 1 first-round pick as opposed to like 5, can you say definitively where that value is?
Yes, if we could crack open the tool, I would. Yeah, basically that's in our trade evaluator. Basically, there are going to be, in this case, if you had this much of a delta, you would probably overpay for the pick relative to most charts. And that's, again, because I think, the Chicago Bears know this, but in this particular pick panel, Chicago knows this less than you do. vis-a-vis these, made up numbers here. Somebody, we have,
minus the caponomics when it comes to using Marvel, do you see a situation where college coaches can use Marvel to evaluate players and build their roster out of the transfer portal?
I think that minus caponomics, absolutely. I think that it's just a different optimization problem. And this one's just more tractable because we know what every team is dealing with, cap-wise, not cash-wise necessarily. The big innovation is going to be if teams open up their books and tell us how much NIL money they have, because that would actually, go a long way towards that. But yeah, this can be extended to that, very much so. That's a great question.
Yeah, I think we're out of time, but I think we can continue the conversation if anyone has any questions outside. But thank you so much.